Chapter 1. The Arrival. It began like any other day. The sun rose over the horizon, banishing the cool night air with its warm glow. Commuters flooded the streets, subways, and highways, starting another monotonous workday. No one noticed the faint red dot in the otherwise clear blue morning sky, steadily growing larger. The first indication something was amiss came when cell phones and radios abruptly cut out, their screens fuzzing with static. Confused murmurs rippled through crowds as a shadow passed overhead, blotting out the sun for a few chilling moments before engines screamed by in a blast of scorching wind. Chaos erupted on the streets as people stared up at the sky. An enormous ship hung over the city, easily miles long, black and sleek with an alien design. It dwarfed the tallest skyscrapers, humming with a barely perceptible menace. Frank Shaw, a grizzled war veteran, gazed at the monstrosity hovering above and tightened his grip on his morning coffee. His weathered features creased into a frown. This was no satellite or experimental aircraft. The hushed silence clinging to the initial shockwave of the ship's arrival unnerved him. Still, he refused to panic. Not yet. Not until he knew what threat they faced. He dumped his untouched coffee into the gutter and headed for the city center on foot, his mind racing. On the other side of the city, Eva Carollo's hands shook, causing the spoon to clatter against the sides of the ceramic mug clutched tight in her hands. Staring out the cafe window, she blinked hard, willing the mirage to vanish. The ship remained. This wasn't the first time she'd seen impossible things, a side effect of the episodes ever since the accident that took her parents. But her visions had never been on this scale, nor shared by so many. A hand clasped her shoulder, startling her from her thoughts. "Eva, we need to get underground. Find shelter," urged a breathless voice. Riley, the barista who'd just started his shift. His eyes were wide behind thick-rimmed glasses. Eva nodded, snapping into action. If this was really happening, people would need help. She'd seen enough disaster movies to know structures above ground were vulnerable. Subway tunnels, basements, underground garages, anywhere away from the reach of the ship looming above. They hurried from the cafe, spreading the word to seek shelter below. On a quiet suburban street, retired scientist Haruto Mitsui watched his neighbors flee as helicopters buzzed overhead. He alone stood transfixed, peering through binoculars as the metallic behemoth hovered silent and motionless beyond the skyline. His keen mind raced through questions. Extraterrestrial origin? Technology capable of traversing the stars? Intent hostile or benign? Insufficient data either way. With brisk efficiency, he packed a bag of essentials, notebooks, flash drives, toolkit, and got in his car, heading away from the city center. Information first, conclusions later. In the financial district, Paula Singh cursed under her breath as all the screens in her firm's trading floor displayed crimson error messages before going dark. What little calm remained evaporated as a junior analyst shouted for everyone to look out the window. Ignoring the panicked exodus around her, Paula pulled out her phone and dialed her brother Rajiv's cell. No signal. She prayed he'd gotten underground in time. Rajiv always teased her for keeping a go bag under her desk for emergencies. She grabbed it and headed for the stairwell, marching downstairs in practical Oxfords, while others ran frantically. Once outside, she followed the flow of people down into the subway tunnels, keeping her head while others gave in to their fears. She couldn't afford panic, not when Rajiv needed her. On the subway, Rajiv hugged his worn canvas backpack to his chest, swaying with the jostling crowds packed tight around him. He thought he'd gotten used to the noise and bodies after 6 months of homelessness. But today, the crowd's anxiety was palpable, flowing under hushed, tense conversations. Deserted by his adoptive parents, then laid off from his job, he had learned how quickly security could vanish. He hoped Paula was safe. At least down here they had a chance. At City Hall, Mayor Wilson struggled to maintain order as all communication and power systems crashed. Intelligence confirmed the ship originated from deep space, technology far beyond anything on Earth. The National Guard mobilized, but if the aliens' intention proved hostile, there was little they could do. The mayor urged citizens below ground to take shelter as a precaution. They had to buy time to gather information and assess the full danger. if they even could. General Hampton watched from the operations bunker as satellites detected smaller craft launching from the alien ship, descending in all directions. He steeled himself against the barrage of contradictory reports flooding in. Staying calm and reacting strategically was imperative, even if they faced Armageddon itself. He gave the order to mobilize air support units, praying conventional weapons would at least slow their advance. The civilians still on the surface desperately needed time to evacuate. It was the only option left. From the bridge of the vast mothership, the Zriddle commander observed the panicked humans scattering below. Primitive ants fleeing their disturbed nest, unaware how hopelessly outmatched they were. The squadrons descending would round them up soon enough. Minimal resistance was anticipated. The attack ships swarmed in synchrony, unleashing bright beams that reduced tanks and aircraft to molten slag. Primitive projectile weapons pinged harmlessly off the swarm's shields. Within minutes, humanity's most advanced militaries were decimated, reduced to smoldering wreckage. On the ground, Frank grimaced as he watched helplessly, while alien ships obliterated their most potent weapons. He'd seen enough war to recognize how dire things looked. But he also knew that as long as you drew breath, you kept fighting. People shrieked and sobbed around Ava and Riley as distant explosions rumbled underground. Riley looked desperately to her for guidance. "We need to keep them together," she urged. "Get the injured to safety, head further in, away from the surface." She pointed survivors down the dark subway tunnels, mustering her most reassuring smile. Haruto observed the attack's conclusion from the safety of his lab in the countryside. The display of overwhelming firepower confirmed the worst. Still, the ship's positioning indicated monitoring, not destruction, intent. Perhaps relations could yet be established. He began compiling an encrypted databurst of mathematical and physical constants, hoping such universal truths might provide an opening for communication. In the trading floor stairwell, Paula listened to the muffled booms while helping an elderly coworker who could barely walk. She focused on each careful step, pushing away visions of Rafik crushed in collapsing buildings. Until confirmed otherwise, hope remained. With communication down, she had to believe her brother's resourcefulness would see him through this. It was all she could do. Pinned in place by anxious crowds, Rajiv flinched violently at the thunderous impacts from above. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply until the shaking eased. He had to trust that if Paula made it out of her building safely, she'd find her way here. He clung to that hope with all his strength. They'd promised to always be there for each other. He refused to consider any alternative. In the smoky operations bunker, General Hampton watched his aides' stoic faces as casualty reports flooded in. He bore the full weight of leadership's burden. Now was the time for compassion. He thanked each officer individually for their service before dismissing them to care for their families. They saluted him with tears in their eyes, unable to speak. He sank into a chair alone and waited for the end. On the mothership bridge, the Zriddle commander received confirmation that all significant military targets had been eliminated. Scans indicated the majority of the population had fled underground, where they could be easily cornered and contained. It was almost disappointing how little support this colony had provided. Still, its resources would be useful for the Empire. The commander issued the order to begin landing occupation forces. Earth's assimilation would soon be complete. In a downtown subway platform, Frank kept wary eyes overhead, listening for alien activity. As survivors stumbled in, he pointed them towards safer tunnel routes, encouraging them to support the injured and lost. A young girl stood crying for her mother until Frank distracted her with funny faces. Her tentative laughter gave him hope. The aliens may have won this battle, but the war had only just begun. Eva tended to the wounded with Riley's help, ripping up clothes for bandages. Around her, frightened groups huddled together for comfort, colleagues clinging to shared purpose, children weeping in confused parents' arms. But despair had not conquered all. A resolute strength shone in many faces, the light of humans determined to survive, no matter the odds. As the first alien transports descended beyond his lab's walls, Haruto completed his data burst and launched it toward the looming ship. Either the beings inside were open to reason, or humanity's last hope lay with those who even now gathered below ground, sheltered and organized. If the aliens intended conquest, they had severely underestimated humankind's resilience. Standing stalwart amidst rising panic in the subway, Paula slowly exhaled. All her studies of crises had taught her one truth. No matter how dire things became, panic served no one. She would stay calm, aid those around her, and have faith that the aliens' superior technology did not make them superior in spirit. Humanity had survived worse trials before and would do so again. Rajiv closed his eyes, tuning out the frantic noise. In his mind, he was with Paula, joking over steaming cups of chai in their tiny apartment. The city had tried to break them before. It had failed then, and it would fail now. The aliens didn't understand how strong bonds of love and family made ordinary people extraordinary. But they soon would learn. Above the burning wreckage of the world he once knew, General Hampton now saw clearly the path ahead. In times of desperation, ordinary people achieved the impossible through quiet courage and sacrifice. The aliens controlled the skies, but the hearts and will of humankind remained free, and they would fight for them to their very last breath. Chapter 2. Under Occupation. In the days after the invasion, an eerie quiet fell over the city. The once bustling streets sat empty save for the hulking alien walkers, methodically patrolling on jointed metal legs. Any humans caught in the open were instantly paralyzed by blue rings of energy from the walkers' cannons. Those who tried to flee were cocooned in shimmering force fields, then dragged to glowing purple towers that appeared overnight. In the subway tunnels below, Frank did his best to keep survivors calm and quiet as the thunder of mech steps rattled the walls. He organized small groups to venture to the surface after curfew to scavenge abandoned buildings for food, water, and medical supplies. It was dangerous but necessary work. Their little community was growing by the day as more escaped the aliens' roundups. On the surface, Eva clung to the shadows, following close behind Riley as they slipped from alley to alley. They were nearly back to the hidden subway access point when a patrol of insect-like bipeds emerged ahead of them. Riley stumbled, bottles rattling in his backpack. Eva yanked him into a doorway, just as an alien head swiveled toward them, bulbous eyes gleaming. They held their breath, praying the darkness would hide them. After agonizing moments, the patrol finally passed. Eva heaved a silent sigh of relief. Too close. Haruto watched the walkers from his hidden observation post, studying their movements. Methodical, precise, and consistent. Clearly robotic centurions, not actual aliens. The design suggested a hive-like intelligence at work. Incredibly advanced technology, yet even machines had flaws. Disrupt the control signal, and these could be disabled. Easier theorized than implemented, but progress nonetheless. In a cramped basement, Paula hugged her little brother as an alien transport rumbled by outside. It had taken 2 nerve-wracking days to find Rajiv after the initial attack. 2 days believing the worst, barely sleeping as she helped Frank's community and monitored the aliens' actions. When she finally saw Rajiv's face in one refugee group, the relief nearly overwhelmed her. They would get through this, together. Rajiv rubbed his perpetually empty stomach, trying to ignore the hunger pangs. He was grateful not to be locked away in whatever sinister purpose the alien tower served. But supplies were scarce. The group was getting restless. He'd overheard angry whispers questioning Frank's leadership. But Rajiv knew their real enemy was above. Change would come through patience and cooperation, not violent outbursts. In the operations bunker, General Hampton studied recon reports, searching for patterns and weaknesses. The initial assault had crippled their offensive capabilities, but he still had keen strategists and analysts under his command. They just needed time to learn their enemy. He would keep resources stockpiled and defenses ready for when the resistance made their move. On the mothership, the Zoretal commander finished an uneventful inspection of the new colony. By now, all urban areas contained resource gathering and processing centers protected by roaming patrols. Minimal disruption was expected going forward. These creatures' defiance seemed almost extinguished. Soon they would be docile and obedient drones. The commander turned his focus toward quelling the next sector's native life forms. For days, Frank's community subsisted on whatever nourishment their supplies could provide, carefully rationing every last scrap. But children cried with hunger, and the injured needed more than moldy crackers to heal. With great care, Frank planned a raid on an alien food stockpile detected just above their position. If they worked together, they just might obtain enough to survive. When Frank shared the daring plan, Eva stepped forward without hesitation. She knew these tunnels better than anyone after months of hiding from her visions. She could guide a small team through maintenance shafts and little-used side passages to avoid detection. They would succeed, she vowed. Failure was not an option. Haruto observed the aliens airlifting cargo into a warehouse not far from his lab. Whatever was inside was bound to be valuable. He made careful note of the patrol's timing and blind spots. Under cover of night, he was confident he could infiltrate and scan their tech, gaining invaluable data on potential vulnerabilities. A scientist's work was never done. Rajiv kept watch as Paula slipped out with a raiding party into the night. He knew she was capable, but that did little to ease his worries. He busied himself organizing bedding and preparing food packets they hoped to distribute soon. Simple tasks that let him focus on helping instead of dwelling on how much was out of his hands. In the bunker, General Hampton received scattered reports of supply caches and alien facilities being raided by stealthy attackers. There was no pattern or trace of who was responsible, but the implications were clear. The embers of resistance had been fanned into flames. He smiled grimly. The fight was on. Now they would see what humanity was truly made of. The Zredal commander stepped through the wreckage of a processing plant, claws twitching in irritation. The damage was not catastrophic, but any disruption lowered efficiency. Clearly, indigenous sentiment persisted despite containment efforts. Drones often required adjustment before achieving full docility. These creatures would be no different. Obedience would be achieved by any means necessary. The raid on the alien stockpile was perilous, but one look at the starving faces awaiting their return steeled Eva's resolve. She ignored the burning in her lungs as she led her team through lightless passages on a roundabout path back to home base. They moved together wordlessly, each step laden with hope and purpose. Tonight they feasted. Tomorrow the fight continued. Haruto crept away from the warehouse under the cover of darkness, precious scans secured in his grasp. The risk had been calculated, but worth it. His analysis of their technologies was already suggesting possibilities. Disrupt the energy pattern here, neutralize the signal frequency there, pierce the armor at this angle. Theories he needed to test. The work he began tonight might just save them all. Rajiv's heart leapt when he saw Paula stagger through the access tunnel, laden with packages and supported by weary comrades. He rushed over and wrapped her in a crushing hug, unable to stem relieved tears. She ruffled his hair like when they were young, smiling proudly. Together they distributed the hard-won bounty, each mouthful a small victory against impossible odds. In the operations bunker, General Hampton tallied the reports. Raids to gather intelligence, technology, and supplies. Targeted strikes to slow production and stoke unrest. His strategists were already formulating ways to assist without risking exposure. They would help fan the flames, patiently and judiciously. The people had rediscovered their power. Now was the time to focus it like a laser toward victory. On the mothership, the Zredal commander could no longer ignore the growing wave of petty disruptions. The native creatures were more troublesome than anticipated. No matter, nothing that could not be stamped out once located. The commander deployed more observers and doubled enforcement patrols. Rebellion was inevitable. But it would be brief. Days later, Eva led another raiding party toward a new target Frank had picked. Alien botanical gardens, supplying their food production centers. With careful planning, they might liberate enough crops to last for weeks. Each small victory brought them closer to something greater. However long it took, eventually their enemies would fall. Chapter 3. The Turning Tide. Frank proudly surveyed the growing community bustling within their hidden subway station refuge. In a few short weeks, they had accomplished so much. Scavenging and raiding parties kept their supplies stocked. Engineers rigged generators and tapped wires to restore power and lighting. Medics cared for the injured in makeshift wards. Teachers held classes for restless children during the long days in hiding. Scientists like Haruto worked to understand the alien technology confiscated in raids. And Eva's scouts, following her uncanny intuition, still eluded detection on their missions above. While far from comfortable or safe, they had carved out refuge and purpose in their underground sanctuary. But it was not enough. Word came from General Hampton that their haven was not unique. A network of active resistance cells had sprung up across the city, across the country, across the world. If they succeeded in unifying their efforts, coordinated strikes could be launched instead of isolated raids. Frank knew the time had come to reach out to allies. If humanity was to have any hope of reclaiming their world, they would have to stand together. In a midnight meeting with Haruto and the community's makeshift leadership council, Frank proposed establishing secure communication lines between resistance cells to share intelligence and strategies. Years of military training told him coordination and support were what transformed scattered efforts into a force for change. After solemn discussion, the proposal was enthusiastically approved. They dispersed to implement this vital first step, hearts alight with cautious optimism. The time had come to show the aliens they had made a grave mistake in underestimating humankind. Across the city, Paula listened intently as similar plans were outlined among the leaders of her own refugee community. Finally, the key step they needed to expand their resistance beyond sporadic survival efforts. She immediately volunteered to help establish contact with other groups, calling upon her corporate experience in global team building. Many nodded somberly, well aware of the danger they invited by extending trust, both from alien eavesdroppers and would-be human traders seeking favor. But the risk was necessary. This new alliance might just shift the tide of battle in their favor. In a third resistance hub 2 miles away, Rajiv proudly watched his usually timid sister take charge of networking plans. He knew firsthand her gift for bridging divides and bringing people together. She had done it for him his whole life, ever since their parents died. He would do everything to support this bold step, even just by keeping fellow refugees' spirits lifted with songs and stories as the days ahead grew darker. Their hope for a better tomorrow relied on efforts today, however small. In the hidden bunker, General Hampton's heart swelled at word the civilian militias had independently come to the same strategic conclusion as his advisors. Coordination was paramount. In slight violation of protocol, he dispatched 2 trusted aides to facilitate discreet contact between resistance cells prepared to unite. The time they had bought through strategic sacrifices was bearing fruit. Together they would forge this underdog alliance into a revolutionary force, one capable of ending the alien tyranny for good. Aboard the mothership, the Zredal commander again reviewed the data streams indicating growing incidents of disruption across the new colony. Previously minor issues had coalesced into an organized campaign of sabotage and data theft as natives coordinated between multiple enclaves. However, analysts traced communication channels back to probable nexus points where examples would have to be made. The habitual defiance these creatures displayed left no other recourse. They forced this hand. Swift, merciless justice was required to maintain order. Ava led her scouts through decaying maintenance tunnels far below the city center. According to Haruto's research, this path would bypass the heaviest security zones surrounding their target, a data hub Frank hoped might hold valuable intelligence. She glanced back at her team's determined faces one last time before pulling the manhole cover open. Tonight's mission struck directly at the heart of the aliens' network. If they succeeded, they just might shift the tide. Emerging topside under starless skies, Paula hugged her tablet tight to her chest, hyper-aware of each forlorn building and empty street around her. Moving above ground always raised her pulse, but this cache of broadcasting equipment stolen in the last raid could enable secure transmissions between resistance groups when adapted. Her technical expertise made her the obvious courier for this vital payload. She slipped from shadow to shadow, focused on the rendezvous point ahead. Rajiv did his best to calm frightened children in the cramped shelter bay as the aliens commenced what seemed like an especially vigorous surface patrol outside. He wondered if Paula had returned safely from her courier run. He couldn't bear losing her after they'd just been reunited. But her work meant freedom inched closer. He would be brave, for her sake and those of the young souls beside him. Their future depended on it. In the operations bunker, General Hampton reviewed reconnaissance photos showing concentration of alien forces near known resistance enclaves. He braced for the worst, knowing the long-dreaded retaliation had come. He could only trust that the militias had the strength and will to weather the storm. One eye forever remained on the horizon beyond, where future victory lived if they persevered. If humanity faltered, all hope for liberation died. This was the crucible that would define their destiny. On the mothership bridge, the Zrydal commander studied the holographic display. As hunter ships launched toward population centers the resistance were known to frequent. The insurgents would learn the folly of challenging their dominance. All the planet's forces combined were no match for even a fraction of the technological might the Empire could bring to bear. Today's lesson would remind them how powerless they truly were before their masters. From across the city, scattered reports flowed in of hunter ships converging overhead. Frank exchanged grave looks with Eva and Haruto. "This is it," he said simply. They had known retaliation was inevitable after disrupting alien operations for so long. Now the time had come to pay the price for their boldness. Frank only prayed the evacuation protocols they'd prepared were enough for those who could not fight to survive. Paula held her breath as the troop carrier passed close by her hiding spot. Through a cracked window, she glimpsed Rajiv comforting a group of children inside before their transport disappeared down the tunnel. She prayed he would stay calm and keep them safe, however long the city remained under attack. This war was never just about defeating the enemy. It was about guarding the innocence and hope of those unable to protect themselves. Rajiv forced a confident smile for the kids crowded close around him in the hurtling transport. "Let's sing songs, Giselle," he said over the engine roar, launching into a silly pop hit whose lyrics soon echoed along with the children's high voices. Their courage lifted his own. He would shepherd these souls through the dark days ahead, one song, one smile at a time. That was how true victory was won. In the operations bunker, General Hampton stood stalwart amidst the controlled panic, exuding steady calm to his rattled officers. They had prepared for this counterstrike, stockpiling assets to deploy at the crucial moment. When the aliens struck their heaviest blows, believing resistance crushed, they would retaliate with a surprise offensive, mustering every weapon and fighter to penetrate their enemies' defenses for the first time. Victory sprang from persistence. This war was far from over aboard the mothership, the Zrydal commander observed with satisfaction as hunter ships commenced bombardment of population zones linked to insurgent activity. After today, the last embers of rebellion would be extinguished. The colony would be docile once more. These beings could never comprehend the folly of challenging an empire that had crushed thousands of worlds before them. Arrogance and ignorance had doomed them from the start. In the subway shelter, Eva climbed through a narrow maintenance shaft, guided by instincts she long ago learned to trust. According to Haruto's calculations, this little-used tunnel should place them directly beneath the data hub. She prayed the airstrike's topside masked their infiltrations. Within the access tunnel, she turned and nodded silently to each team member before lifting the cover. Now was the time for their daring to pay off, for their world's freedom. Frank grimaced as dust and smoke filled the subway tunnels from the bombardment above. Their shelters were holding for now, but supplies would not last if the onslaught continued long. He ordered defenders to stand ready at major tunnel junctions in case of attempted invasion. No matter what, they would not give up or surrender. The aliens could destroy their homes above, but never conquer their spirit below. That was their invincible weapon. Rajiv felt the children wince as each explosion thundered overhead, hugging them close and launching into more songs. A paint can left behind in the transport supply bay gave him an idea. By the chorus of the second song, a beautiful mural took shape on the metal wall, the vibrant colors and imagery transforming their stark shelter into a place of hope. The children smiled proudly at the artwork, enjoying the next song at the top of their lungs. Rajiv grinned, heart full of love for their resilience. In a bunker conference room, General Hampton and the Global Joint Chiefs coordinated deployment waves as the counteroffensive launched under cover of the alien bombardment. Infantry, armor, aircraft, and hackers struck in unison, pressing every advantage. For the first time since the invasion, humankind took the fight directly to their oppressors. Come what may, they were all in this together now, and united humanity was unstoppable. On the mothership bridge, alarms blared as the Shrital commander watched in disbelief the primitive life forms striking at installations thought secured. The scattered attacks even disabled regional observation modules, delaying coordinated response. Priority alert orders were transmitted to local commanders. How could such an impotent species exhibit this continued defiance? No matter, this changing tide would ebb when sufficient force was applied. In the data hub access shaft, Eva held her breath as the decrypted files downloaded onto Haruto's storage drives. Around her, the team stood alert, ready to buy him time if guards appeared before it was complete. The precious intel could reveal strategic weaknesses in the aliens' operations. Like Frank said, their persistence was finally paying dividends. She allowed herself a fierce smile. Today they turned the tide. Paula rushed to Rajiv's shelter, heart pounding as smoke from damaged tunnels choked the passage. The bombardment was scaling back as alien fighters were drawn away to larger resistance offensives across the globe. Whatever secret plan the generals had enacted, it was their chance to evacuate civilians from the decimated city. She prayed she reached them in time. Enduring this onslaught was victory enough. Their future lay elsewhere now. Rajiv grinned in relief as he saw Paula's face appear through the hazy tunnel. It was time to go. He rallied the children, shepherding their exhausted but upbeat spirits topside toward evacuation point Frank had designated. Paint stained his hands and clothes, but the joyful songs echoed down the passage long after their transport disappeared above. Each voice was a light piercing the darkness. Together, their hope could never be vanquished. In the operations bunker, General Hampton stood stoic amidst the flurry of damage reports, casualty counts, and glimpses of victory. The assault waves were withdrawing on schedule before losses became untenable. They had achieved the primary objective, penetrating alien defenses by striking interconnected targets simultaneously, gaining vital intel and loosening their grip across whole continents. Now was the time for strategic retreat, after planting seeds of their enemy's defeat. On the mothership bridge, the Shrital commander seethed as the tide of battle turned fully against them. The colony's native life forms exhibited adaptability and resilience beyond any encountered before. Long-range scans showed their counteroffensive had expanded beyond the planet's atmosphere, disrupting orbital command nodes. Creatures that should have been long pacified had upended generations of Imperial expansion doctrine in days. The implications were concerning. Command sounded the call across the sector fleet for reinforcements. Final pacification required an overwhelming show of force. The Shrital did not lose worlds under their aegis. They would never allow it. Chapter 4. Alliance of Earth. In the weeks following the counteroffensive, Frank watched proudly as differences that once divided his community fell away. Nationality, race, status, none of it mattered now in their united purpose. He saw former rivals become steadfast allies, bonds forged through shared hardship and simple acts of kindness in the darkness. If they could maintain this solidarity with other enclaves, real change could come. He shared these thoughts with Paula as they took inventory in the crowded but orderly supply caves. We have to build alliances between communities across regions, share resources, unite everyone in common cause, she agreed. Frank nodded, heartened that leaders worldwide were coming to the same realization. Only together could they rout their oppressors for good. Nearby, Rajiv sang while passing out blankets, buoying weary spirits. He had watched Paula bridge rifts all his life with patience and compassion. Now among these refugees, he did the same, bringing cheer where there was weariness, light where there was gloom. If they tended to hearts and minds, unity would follow. Their fledgling community was living proof. In the Global Operations Bunker, General Hampton stood before a world map, noting resistance hotspots and alien targets. Guerrilla strikes had weakened the enemy's grip across whole continents. Now was the time for coordinated liberation offensives. But first, remaining enclaves must unite despite old divisions. He dispatched envoys to share plans and intelligence to any who would stand with them, no matter the bloodshed previously in wars between brethren. Against this common foe, they must rise over history as brothers once more. Aboard the mothership, the Zriddle commander finished assessing the request for reinforcements from the home fleet. Destroying the planet's infrastructure had proven ineffective. The life forms simply faded into their burrows, emerging more defiant than ever. New projections showed pacification would require extensive surface sweep operations and direct neural grafting modification of mature units. A massive influx of resources and personnel was required before they lost all control. Ava reviewed the latest intel piped in through their fledgling comm network, shaking her head grimly. They're bringing in ships from worlds across the sector for some new pacification plan. We have to be ready. Around the strategy table, hardened faces nodded. They all knew what was coming after driving the aliens back for so long. Now was the time for their unceasing persistence to pay dividends as the shadow of destruction loomed. In a briefing hall near the Andes, Paula presented the communication array schematics to gathered engineers and techs. With this, local resistance cells could stay in contact and coordinate harassment operations even if the aliens disrupted global networks. United, humanity could achieve anything. Around the room, tired but determined eyes watched her intently. Minds and hearts were aligning. Soon their powers combined might just tip the odds in humanity's favor. At a safe house near the Himalayas, Rajiv helped smuggle refugees over remote mountain passes to reach rebel camps in the valleys beyond. Song and story kept them moving through the tireless days and freezing nights. He was but one of thousands in the great exodus toward liberation. Alone he was insignificant, but together their steps and voices shook the very foundations of the night sky that had fallen over their world. Hope was their revolution. In bunkers and command posts around the world, the final coalition took shape as old adversaries became new allies under the mounting threat. African warlords stood with businessmen, hackers with soldiers, elders with youths. They would fight not just for their own survival, but for all humankind and the generations yet to come. Before this common cause, all prior divisions faded to obscurity. Their enemy would face a united planet. On distant colony worlds, the Zriddle released indoctrinated conscripts from Imperial service as their ships changed course for the troublesome system, now requiring massive pacification fleets. None dared question why. Glory to the Empire was their singular purpose. No matter where in the galaxy the Empire willed them fight. Their minds and bodies belonged eternally to the halls of Zriddle power. They marched onward, silent and unflinching into the void. In the mothership's strategic data vault, Eva planted the last surveillance malware in the alien network in defiance of trembling hands. The entire timeline hinged on the flawed intel these worms would deliver to enemy command once activated. Haruto and the others were risking everything on this gambit tonight. Either their persistence finally paid off, or the last flicker of resistance would be extinguished forever. She whispered a prayer and slipped away silently into the darkness. In a terraforming complex near the polar regions, Frank set the explosives on a precise timer as Paula stood watch. At least this way, the aliens' resources could nourish the planet, not just their war machine. Synced to the pulse of the energy grid, the detonations would disrupt production across continents. Little by little, their unified sabotage tipped the scales. Now they battled for the very future of humankind. Failure was not an option. At a remote airbase captured weeks prior, Rajiv moved among the fighters, radiating contagious hope with his songs and stories. He spoke of life and beauty, moments spent with loved ones now gone but never forgotten. Little flames of humanity never to be extinguished. Like fireflies in the night, each spirit held a spark to illuminate the darkness. Together, they were a conflagration ushering in a new dawn. From calloused hands and weary hearts still rose defiant cheers that echoed into the heavens. In the Global Operations Bunker, General Hampton reviewed the distribution of assets for the Unified Liberation Strike. All strategic industries and population centers were covered from land, air, sea, and space. Hackers stood by to exploit the surveillance malware they'd fought so bitterly to infiltrate previously. And citizen militias across regions had abandoned old divisions to stand together, come what may. Everything now rested on their combined courage and resolve. Hampton bowed his head and prayed for providence. They would only get one shot at this. From the bridge of the Zridal command ship, the Sector Fleet Admiral again reviewed the mammoth pacification resources now committed to the rebellious planet. Surely such a massive show of technological might could instill discipline in these unruly lifeforms. If not, orbital bombardment remained an option of last resort. The Empire's authority was absolute and would be respected, as it had for eons before them. The tide of defiance breaking on these backwater shores would soon be repelled, never to rise again. The day arrived with no sunrise, only a black tide of ships filling the skies from horizon to horizon. From the surface, Frank watched a wingsuit squadron launch on plumes of blue, former rivals standing united against the Dark Descendants. He said a silent prayer for their success high above as the ground assault forces charged ahead into destiny. The time had come to cast their defiance into the stars themselves. From the passenger seat of an armored jeep, Paula kept an anxious eye overhead as Rajiv drove them recklessly toward their target coordinates. Today, their fates, and that of their entire world, rested in the hands of those who once pointed missiles at each other from across oceans, mountains, and ideologies. But no more. Earth's true colors flew proudly now from poles to tropics, the hues of endurance, courage, and hope undying. Over interception zones in low orbit, Eva listened as squadron chatter exploded with alarm at the lack of orbital support fire. The malware had worked. She locked onto the nearest target with teeth gritted behind her oxygen mask. All those hopes and prayers had led to this, one shining moment to seize their destiny. With a defiant whoop across the comms, she led her formation on the attack. The skies would soon belong to humanity again. On the ground, Rajiv's voice faltered mid-song as a wing of alien dropships descended toward a hospital shelter ahead. He looked at Paula and knew this was the moment that demanded everything of them. Without a word, she squeezed his hand tightly, blinking back tears. He sang again then, his lone voice rising brave and true, each note a prayer flung defiantly into the dawn. Side by side, they drove onward, come what may. In low orbit, the Sector Fleet Admiral watched in disbelief as Ben-Dai lifeforms piloted captured interceptors with astounding skill, blunting the Vanguard's assault. How was this possible? The pacification fleet outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. There must be some mistake. Surely these barely civilized creatures could never wield the Empire's own weapons against them. Eyes narrowed, the Admiral commanded the annihilation of whole landmasses, obedience at any cost. Aboard the mothership below, the Zridal commander uttered the same order. All prior illusions of benevolent rule burned away in the crucible of desperation. On the ground, General Hampton stood stalwart at the tactical display, stomaching the losses as enemy reinforcements began orbital bombardment across continents. Their unified strike had crippled production and logistics, a heavy blow but not death. Now above, humanity dueled titans for dominion over land, skies, and space. All he could do was have faith in them now. Each lost precious life fueled the flames until victory blazed bright once more. Until then, they would endure, as they always had. Under fire in guerrilla firefights across cities, Frank exchanged solemn looks with grizzled platoon leaders who once epitomized enemy. Now brotherhoods were forged anew in the mud and tears of their united stand. They knew the ships above rained untold destruction worldwide simply to quell their defiance. But come what may, their spirit remained unbroken. Together, for the first time, they would make oppressors pay for every inch of ground with blood. When the capital's children's shelter took a direct hit, Eva screamed into the raging sky as she watched the explosion below. The grief hardened into cold resolve as she banked her fighter back toward the flagship looming overhead. The lives lost today would echo throughout the stars. Never again would the sanctity of home and hearth be threatened so. She snarled into the ether as her weapon systems locked on. "You're going to regret the day you threatened our worlds." As the last evacuation shuttle lifted off under heavy fire, Rajiv gazed out the porthole beside Paula in awed silence. Below, the battlefield terrain was hidden beneath billowing smoke. But still, the liberation forces fought on. They rose over it all together, erasing borders and barriers forever. He smiled sadly, whispering a final prayer for those who made their escape possible, whose sacrifice today etched unity across the human spirit at last, never to fade. On the ground, the Zrudal commander marched through fire and chaos to take personal command. Frustration building. The native life forms fought on with disturbing tenacity and effectiveness, despite being massively outmatched. Preliminary reports showed pacification fleet losses exceeded projections by impossible margins. Rage threatened to cloud judgment. This primate infestation couldn't possibly win. But data showed they could fight on for months, even years, however illogically. The commander slammed a clenched claw down in disgust. Unthinkable as it was, withdrawal may be the only logical option. In low orbit, Paula held her breath as the battle raged around the last evacuation transports fleeing the planet. But somehow, impossibly, the escort wings had turned the tide. The liberation forces now pressed the advantage with stunning coordination even amidst unspeakable losses planetside. As the stunned alien fleet withdrew under ceaseless harassment, Paula murmured a prayer from her childhood, wishing her parents could see this impossible victory. No longer was humanity's scattered tribes divided. Now at last came the birth of their true alliance. On the ground, General Hampton fell to his knees in the smoldering command bunker as reports confirmed the withdrawal order transmission from Alien High Command. They had held the line, fighting on even as whole cities burned around them. And united for the first time in history, their stand had broken the will of an empire spanning the stars. Dimly through smoke and tears, he registered the deafening cheers and screams of utter joy. They had won this battle, but at such cost. Yet now, with alliance forged in blood, the future lay within humanity's grasp. Their finest hour had come. Nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 5: The Final Stand. In the weeks after humanity's unified stand drove the invaders back, a cautious optimism took root across liberated zones. Frank walked the muddy streets where impromptu block parties sprung up, savoring tired but hopeful faces. For the first time since the war began, people spoke eagerly of tomorrow. But he knew the reprieve was just that. Their enemies still lurked above, weakened but not defeated. Now was the time to strategize the final blow. Around the strategy table, he proposed one daring possibility: take the fight directly to the mothership in orbit. Eva enthusiastically agreed. "We know their technology now, their tactics," she said. "Together we can overwhelm their defenses." Paul and Rajiv shared worried looks, but nodded. After all they had endured and achieved united, no longer could they wait on their heels. The sword must be taken up once more to sever the threat above, forever. In the bunker, General Hampton met with the Joint Chiefs, solemnly reviewing the grievous losses across continents. Orbital scans confirmed the bulk of the alien fleet had withdrawn, save for the mothership looming imperiously overhead, survivors clinging to its shielded hull. Their defiance had surprised and bloodied the enemy, but final victory remained elusive. Bold strategy was required. He authorized offensive plans for the perilous assault mission, codenamed Icarus. Their destiny now rested in brave hands and bold hearts, united by sacrifice. On the mothership, the Zrudal commander fumed silently in the gloom of the bridge, their centuries of expansion and progress reversed by this backwater rabble. The unthinkable losses would invite scrutiny from high command. Orbital scans detected enemy forces massing, but with the bulk of the pacification fleet withdrawn, only a skeleton defense remained. Seething, the commander prepared to make the primates pay dearly for their impudence one last time before retreating from this accursed system. Never again would the Empire underestimate their defiant will. At launch sites hidden across ravaged continents, swarms of assault shuttles and fighters stood ready, patched together from the wreckage of war. In their holds, grim liberation armies tightened armor and offered silent prayers. Through storms and chaos, their alliance had held fast. Now the crucible of combat called them again. Their world's freedom awaited atop the steel wings, piercing the heavens. Frank clasped hands with grizzled platoon leaders who months ago were his mortal enemies. Together they had unified tribes and nations across every border and ideology. "For our children's future," he said simply, their clasped hands stacked atop one in solemn oath, until even cynics blinked back proud tears. Come what may, their stand today would echo for eternity. Strapped into an interceptor cockpit, Eva went through pre-flight checks with steady hands, while Paula rode shotgun managing sensors and sabotage malware. Like countless others, their lives had been fused together in the crucible of war's darkest hours. Eva gave her hand a grateful squeeze. "Let's finish this," she said. Her co-pilot nodded silently, small hand resolute on the trigger. Together, the heavens awaited. Belted into a shuttle hold, Rajiv watched the last safety checks conclude, smiling sadly at children's drawings adorning every surface. Their voices raised in play just days before now echoed only in memory. But he would keep their spirits soaring through the stars the only way he knew, song and unity against darkness. As the engines ignited, he sang gently of hope in dawn beyond night. Weary hearts embraced the tune, voices rising fragile but defiant. On the ground, General Hampton watched the launch swarm streak skyward, granting himself a grim smile. Perhaps it was foolishness, assaulting a flanked enemy in their stronghold. But had not desperation and unity brought them to the brink of the impossible? On the cracked monitors, he saw humanity's proud stand playing out across the celestial stage and knew they could do no less. Not if honor and justice yet prevailed in this universe. All they could do now was pray and believe without wavering. On the mothership bridge, the Zrydal commander observed grimly as the native assault forces approached in well-coordinated formation. How they had rallied after being shattered and scattered was incomprehensible. But they approached Oblivion's maw now, not realization. The commander activated the mothership's dormant weapon systems. If they sought utter ruin, their dying world would grant that wish. None defied the Empire with impunity. In the interceptor cockpit, Paula watched in awe as the orbital guns defending the mothership flashed to life. Moments later, massive shockwaves from plasma impacts buffeted their ranks. But miraculously, the formation held steady through the storm. United, humanity now weathered any fire, be it the stars themselves. With a fierce grin, she unleashed their countermeasures and blasted through to their objective. Over the comms, Rajiv's soothing hymn gently drowned out cries of panic and pain from the shuttle hold as explosions flashed around them. Through the chaos, their transport stayed blessedly on course thanks to the valiant pilots and wings escorting them. He felt their fearful eyes turn to him and managed a quivering smile. By word or deed, he would shepherd their spirits through the valley of death. They were, and always would be, the fragile beating heart of this revolution. On the ground, General Hampton registered the horrific losses as the trap closed round the assault force. Too late. The battle must play out now, without further guidance from below. All he could do was mutter the names of the lost like penance, fists clenched white. The rest depended on them now. Through fire and ruin, their defiant dream must fly onward, or else all was ash and dust. At missile controls across the mothership hull, Frank shuddered as explosions silently blossomed among the dwindling assault shuttles. But still they came onward, absorbing hellish fire that would have stopped armies cold just months before. Now at humanity's twilight, their alliance proved to the stars their flame would never extinguish. Come what may, he would stand with his kin and fight on until seeing their brave, united dream made real. Over internal mothership lines, Eva banked and weaved through tracking plasma bolts, while Paula sliced security protocols. Just ahead, the bridge's shield generators beckoned. With a silent prayer, she gunned their engines on a suicide dive, trusting her co-pilot to work technical magic before impact. This was it, the grand defiant gesture that would echo for ages hence. Together they flew proudly on wings of fire. In the exposed shuttle hold, Rajiv now sang a mournful dirge from his homeland. As the orbital platform girder loomed unavoidably through their viewport, he spoke a wordless goodbye to distant lands once called home. heart overflowing with love unspoken. Though his role in this drama ended here, perhaps the survivors might still glimpse the future beyond victory's distant shore, their sacrifice granted. If this was destiny's weaving, he faced the end without fear or regret. The light of hope could never perish. On the mothership bridge, the Zoidal commander stared aghast at the interceptor hurtling toward the unshielded viewport. These primates flaunted death itself, denying logic. Claws scrambled over controls, fruitlessly trying to reactivate protections before impact. Mindless defiance couldn't prevail. And yet, the commander froze as molten light flooded the bridge, heralding thunder beyond sound or fury. In hangar bays across the hull, Frank gritted teeth as the assault shuttles flew into withering fire one by one. But still he advanced implacably with others who once spoke alien tongues, their boots tramping in solemn chorus. He smiled as the breach warning klaxons began howling. The brave souls who cleared their path would forever shine among legends. Now they proudly took their part in this final unity, burning bright against the dying of the light. On the ground, General Hampton fell to his knees as the mothership's guns abruptly went silent. Could it be? Around him, pandemonium reigned in the control bunkers. With a shaking hand, he traced the blossoming explosions visible through the smoke and clouds. They had done it somehow, his intel teams breathlessly confirmed. Against impossible odds, brave hearts united had found a way once more. Choking back joyful sobs, the old soldier offered a ragged salute skyward. They had won the day. By valor's sacrifice and hope's undying light, Earth stood free again. In days after, while caring for the wounded and laying the honored dead to rest, Eva stirred Paula from a fitful sleep. Together in the pre-dawn hours, they walked among row after row of names engraved on the memorial wall, flags of a reborn world flying proudly overhead. Somewhere, 2 new names were now immortalized in stone. Eva hugged Paula tight, blinking back tears. "Come on," she urged gently. "Rajiv's waiting to see you." Linking hands, the survivors turned resolutely toward the hopeful sunrise beyond morning's veil. Their future now dawned bright and undimmed, thanks to the valiant fallen. At the memorial's dedication, Frank stood proudly between former rebel warlords as the names of the dead echoed toward the clouds like rhythmic thunder. Before departing, each leader placed a flower at the memorial's base. Their smiles and handshakes were bittersweet, but genuine. United, they had forged bonds never to break, whatever came hence. Now finally, Earth's weary heroes could rest from strife. Their living dream, rising reborn from the ashes, would stand eternal guard over this hard-won peace.